Okay. So if anyone does want to turn their video off, then you're really welcome to do that. But okay, I'm gonna.
My children start coming down, I might turn it off.
Yeah, or you can always
funny faces.
And you can always just mute yourself, Sarah, if there's background noise.
Okay, yes, great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so let's get going. So this evening, this webinar is titled Starch. Is it the missing piece of your weight loss puzzle? And let's find out more. So before we go any further, I'm going to move that out of the way. Oh man alive. Okay. Before we go any further, I want to talk about weight loss. Okay, and I'm doing this because I hate this term so much. So I'm going to start with, I think we should be calling it fat loss, not weight loss. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't think we should be talking about loss. I think we should be talking about release. So I think, and this is what I teach people when I work with them, that actually it's not about weight loss. It's about body fat, and it's about getting your body to release any excess body fat that it wants to. And that gets rid of all of this kind of arbitrary idea about how much you should weigh and, you know, what size you should be and all of that, because then what we do, and my approach is, we let your body decide. So what I do is I help people get to a point where they are in really good health, and then everything else kind of falls in a bit behind that. So weighing yourself, that's my next thing that I'm going to talk about, as this is about weight loss. Weighing yourself, in my opinion, is pointless. It's demotivating, and it's a part of that toxic diet mindset that I try to help coach people out of. In my opinion, we should be focusing on metabolic health first. And then what you'll find when you get your metabolic health in an amazing place, all the other stuff is just going to fall into place naturally. So you don't have to count calories and measure food portions and, you know, stand on scales and try to hate it off. You know, all that can just hopefully become something that's a part of your past. So finally, because if you've been told you should lose weight by your medical practitioner, perhaps to improve your health, in fact, it's really the other way around. So your poor metabolic health likely caused your issues with excess body fat in the first place. And I love this kind of picture, because I think that this demonstrates really, really well what I was just talking about. So I want you to think fat release in actual fact, not fat loss, not weight loss. Okay, and this is why. So these two people both weigh exactly the same, but they look really different because of different body composition. And that's why I'm talking about, you know, that release, getting your body to release any excess fat that it doesn't need when it's ready. And so hopefully that's a really good illustration of why it should be about, it's not about weight. And here's another lovely way to look at it. Okay, so we've got these squiggly lines here. So the red dots, if you follow the red dots that are here and here and here and here, this is weight. And the yellow dots going down through the middle, that's fat as it reduces. And so it's normal. It's absolutely normal for your body weight to fluctuate. And I mean, they're saying there daily and even weekly. Body weight fluctuates from hour to hour, because if you think about it, when you stand on the scales, you're weighing your skin, your bones, your muscle, your fat tissue, the amount of water or fluids in your body at the time. And those things, particularly the amount of kind of fluids in your body, you know, fluctuate hugely. And yeah, you know, trying to weigh them it's pointless and a, you know, a really quick way to torture yourself. So let's talk about metabolic health a bit more. What is that? Well, put simply, metabolic health controls how your body stores, converts and uses energy, and as well as that, what it uses as energy. Okay, so you might think, okay, what it uses as energy? I mean, you know, surely we know what it uses as energy. It uses food, but it's kind of a little bit more complex than that. So essentially, there are two pots of energy available for our body to dip into at any one time, and they are sugar and fat. Okay, so my question to you now would be, what does your engine or your body run on? Is it running primarily on sugar or fat? Because in a really metabolically healthy body, your body should be able to dip into either of those pots backwards and forwards as it likes, and that's what we call metabolic flexibility. Okay. Next, the hormone insulin is what controls which pot your body is going into to get its energy from. And insulin resistance is what messes up your body's ability to be able to dip into either pot. So insulin resistance is what prevents metabolic flexibility. And I've kept this really top line tonight because obviously we don't want to go into any depth with this. It all gets very complicated and I disappear falling down rabbit holes. So trying really hard not to do that tonight. So let's have a look at insulin resistance then. What's insulin resistance? Well, here is a super simplified, lovely diagram, which we can have a look at to kind of try to understand it a bit more. So imagine that insulin, a hormone which your body makes, is a key. And this is a cell. So your body's made up of these. And in some cells, some cells store glucose. So for example, skeletal muscle, liver cells, and some fat cells. And they will have these little glucose channels. Okay, so when you eat food, which is sugar or becomes sugar very quickly, your body needs somewhere to put it, because sugar floating around just freely in your bloodstream is super toxic to everything, you know, all the tissues in your body. So much so that your body will only allow 4 grams of sugar at any one time to be circulating in the entire volume of blood in your whole body. That's 1 teaspoon of sugar. Okay, so because your body understands how toxic, how damaging having that free floating sugar in your bloodstream is to your body in general, it packs it away nice and safely inside these certain cells. And what allows it to enter the cell is the insulin. Okay, so the insulin tucks into what we're going to call it, to what is called an insulin receptor. It's like a lock and a key type thing, it's often described as, and that in turn opens this glucose channel and the glucose can enter the cell. Does that make sense to everybody, or has anyone got any questions? Okay. So let's have a look at insulin resistance in a bit more detail. So it's all about this kind of cycle that happens. Insulin resistance, remember, is what underlies likely any issues that you might have with excess body fat, or with trying to get rid of the excess body fat, or, you know, all the other stuff around that, for the sake of this talk. So when you eat food, any food, apart from if you were eating pure fat, any food, your pancreas produces insulin in response to you eating food. And that's a normal process. And then the next thing that happens is the insulin does what we just saw in detail in that last slide. It goes and it kind of knocks on the outside of these cells that can store sugar, and says, hey, come on, open up, we need you to let us in. So those cells let in the sugar. But in insulin resistance, what happens is that those cells don't hear the message so well. And there are fewer receptors on the outside of the cell. Okay, so the insulin can't do its job as well. That it just, you know, and what the pancreas does in response to that insulin resistance, that less receptors, is that it pumps out more insulin. So you end up with a situation where what happens is the sugar, instead of being stored away in those cells, it's still, some of it still gets stored away in those cells, but you also end up with your body being pushed into a situation where it more readily converts sugar into fat. So in a normal healthy person, with normal healthy metabolic health, excess sugar is converted into fat. As human beings, we store excess energy as body fat. That is brilliant and healthy and wonderful, and it's what keeps us alive. But when it gets messed up, that sort of metabolic health starts to get messed up, all of those things just get knocked out of balance. So your body ends up making body fat way more quickly and more readily than it would normally, and it won't release it like it should normally. It also won't use it as energy as readily as it should. The other thing that happens is, because you have got higher circulating levels of insulin to try to make up for the fact that your body is insulin resistant now, you end up with bigger drops in blood sugar levels. So you get hungry and shaky and hangry perhaps, and your appetite will increase. You'll struggle with energy issues, post-lunch slumps, all those sorts of things much more readily. So you will tend to feel much more tired and hungry if your body is insulin resistant. That makes sense?
So sorry, Mel. So then can I ask the question? Is that okay?
Yes, yeah, don't apologize. Honestly, go. It's great,
Okay,
Sarah.
thank you. I mean, as you know, I struggle with my with excess sugar. I kind of crave sugar, and I know I eat too much. However, how does that work then in terms of the insulin resistance? Because I know my insulin levels are quite high, so my body can't dip into the fat stores. It goes to the sugar, which makes me tired and a bit shaky sometimes. But I don't necessarily have excess body fat.
No.
How does that? Yeah, so how does that work then? What's my body? Is that not a contradiction? But how is my body then working that out? Or is that?
Okay. No, it's good question. So what happens is, it's a really good question, because insulin resistance and excess body fat don't always go hand in hand.
Okay.
So you can be insulin resistant and be struggling with blood sugar levels without having lots of excess body fat. Okay. The other thing, and I'm not sure I put this in here, but the other thing which is really relevant is insulin resistance. There are three primary causes of insulin resistance, and they are inflammation, stress, and chronically raised insulin levels. So let's use type 2 diabetes as an example, okay? Type 2 diabetes is commonly considered to be a disease of people who are obese, okay? But not everybody who has type 2 diabetes is obese. In fact, a really good illustration of that is India is not the most obese country in the world, but it does have the highest levels of type 2 diabetes. So they don't always go hand in hand.
Okay.
And also I think, you know, with you, it's and this is a lovely actually illustration of how complex our bodies are. So I'm describing this in general terms tonight, but it's different for everybody. Yeah, it's slightly different for everybody. And it could well be, we kind of have to guess. I sort of have to guess a bit when I tell people, but I think they're probably a bit insulin resistant. So it could be that actually the way you're fueling is just not really ideal for your body. And that when we get that sorted out, that actually some of your issues will calm down.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, that does. Yes, I think, yeah, I'm sort of helping, you're helping me to sort that out. So I appreciate that. It's a journey. It's definitely not an overnight thing. But it's making the little changes, isn't it?
Yes.
That will kind of count towards the bigger ones in the long run. It's just playing this slow and steady and game and being patient with ourselves. I think that's the thing. You know, I had a weekend, as you know, with family down and overindulgence. But then as a result of that, I felt absolutely rubbish.
Yeah.
The days sort of followed that. And so that I just know that's my body going, what are you doing to me? Actually, you are stressing me out. You've stressed me out with all the stuff that I didn't really need. So yeah, I've definitely kind of noticed it, more conscious, I think, of the difference it's making. So thank you.
You're welcome, because I think you've already noticed that, just taking that a little bit further, have you, that you feel better when you speak?
Definitely.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, in terms of, I can relate to the, because I would always feel, and sometimes do, depending on, you know, life, and you've got more things on, you're more tired in the afternoon, but I would, gosh, feel really, really tired, to the point I just wanted to snooze before the school run, because I'd had, you know, things for lunch that actually weren't particularly, that my body didn't need and didn't want. But it was a quick fix. You know, and I think so that you play, unfortunately, those quick fixes do have consequences, and they're never worth it, really, because I always felt rubbish in the afternoon. I wanted to just have a sleep. But
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Chris, did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to clarify something. I've heard two different points of view. I mean, I've heard that somebody say that the body's not stupid, and if you don't feed it enough, it'll tap, and if the insulin's lower enough, it'll tap into the fat reserves and use those, because that's what it's for. And the body's not stupid enough to start eating its own muscles and protein if it's got fat on it. And then this morning I was talking to Anders Merman, who's the bloke behind the ACE track, you know, the keto breath, yeah. And he was saying, actually, no, that's not true, that your body actually can go into starvation mode because it can't get to use the fat.
I completely agree with him.
Okay.
Yes, so that's the whole point. That is such a good point, and I'm really glad you've raised that, Chris. So if you are somebody, everyone on this call, if you are somebody who has ever experienced you know, kind of haven't eaten for 2 or 3 hours, or maybe perhaps you're someone who actually does really need to eat regularly, otherwise you feel rubbish, but you know that, you know, most of us are carrying at least enough excess body fat, you know, to keep us going for a good couple of weeks. Even those of us that, you know, look pretty lean, you still have enough body fat to keep you going for a little while. Okay, so if you feel a bit sort of hypoglycemic, so a bit shaky, hangry, just generally not very well, if you haven't eaten for a couple of hours, something is going on in terms of your metabolic health, because that means your body is not able to dip into those fat stores. And so just to take that a bit further, we know it's solid medical fact, which has been in the textbooks for a really long time, that when insulin levels are raised above a certain level, lipolysis cannot happen. Your body doesn't do both at the same time. And lipolysis is the name for the body converting fat into ketones to make energy from it.
So would your insulin be raised because you're insulin resistant, you've got more going round, rather than whatever to do with what you're eating or not eating necessarily?
Yes, so another great question. So somebody who's insulin resistant, right? So if you took two people and sat them side by side at a table and fed them exactly the same food, the person who's insulin resistant, you might see their insulin rise to 3-4 times the level of the person who is not insulin resistant, eating exactly the same thing, and there's exactly the same amount of the same thing. And that person who's insulin resistant, not only would their insulin levels rise much higher, they would take a lot longer to come back down to your baseline levels. So we always have insulin in our bloodstream, always, because insulin does way more than just this. So there's a baseline level always. But so that's what happens, yes, Chris. And the result of that happening is that there are much longer times when your insulin will be raised above a level where your body can perform lipolysis. And the other thing which factors into that is, if you're insulin resistant, you're tired and hungry. So you can't, people who are insulin resistant, and that you remember there are different degrees of that too. You know, it's not like you just are and you're just not. There's a little bit and then a little bit more and then a little bit more, and it just, you know, it gets it on a, someone help me out. On a sliding scale of severity.
Spectrum.
Sliding scale of, yes, thank you. And so yeah, you'll probably find that actually people who are insulin resistant tend to not have big times without eating or drinking something, just with a little bit of sugar, and every time just with a little bit of sugar or a little bit of starch, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute, up go those levels again, and up they stay again. So cumulative effect is that insulin could, with a lot of these people, never during the daytime ever drop below a level where the body can perform lipolysis.
So going from that, then I'll get into what's the next. So in that sense, so people that do things like Weight Watchers and that, where it's very restrictive food, but it's not carb restricted. So imagine they're probably losing a bit of fat weight, because must be times when they're not eating or whatever, but the other times they would be losing muscle and stuff because their insulin will be high. Because I know Slimming World, you eat just tons of potatoes, pasta and bananas.
Yes. And we know that, you know, that I'm sure there's some fat lost, but we know that, you know, definitely body muscle tissue gets lost. And then unfortunately what happens is you lose the muscle, then you stop dieting, and then you inevitably go back to doing what you were doing before, not you, but you know, and then you put then you gain fat, not muscle. And then so, you know, muscle acts as a sink for sugar. So, you know, when you're eating off track, it doesn't matter. When you are eating just normally, okay, whatever normal is, skeletal muscle acts as a sink for that sugar and starch, kind of gets sucked up and used by it, which is why exercise is so important. That's why exercise is a rubbish way to lose weight, but exercise is a brilliant way to reduce insulin resistance. So kind of in a roundabout way, it is a good way to help you lose weight, but not because you're using calories or energy, because you are increasing the amount of skeletal muscle you have, and you are decreasing any insulin resistance that you have. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sorry, Mel. The lipolysis, I missed that bit because I got interrupted. What is that process called again? Really sorry, I missed it.
No, lipolysis is the sciencey name for when our body converts our stored body fat into energy.
Right, okay.
And it can't do it. It won't do it, absolutely, if your insulin levels are raised above a certain point.
Brilliant, thank you.
Pleasure. Has anyone else got any questions? Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So you might be answering this later on anyway, and you may have already answered this, so I'm sorry if I've missed it.
Nope.
So insulin levels can be reduced if you do, say, exercise and sports, and can it be reduced with diet as well?
Yes.
So is it just a case of just reducing the amount of processed sugars that you're eating, or is it some other way?
Yes, Bonnie, you can come and work with me. We definitely do need to do a retreat together. Yes, it is, Bonnie. That is exactly it. And yes, we're going to talk about that a bit more. But yes,
I definitely used to get hangry a lot more before I found yoga. I used to get hangry all the time, and me and my mate used to always say, "Oh, blood sugars are low. I just feel all like woozy and everything." We used to make a joke of it, but you know, now I'm understanding that, you know, it's insulin, and I once in a blue moon I'll feel like that once in a blue moon. So that's so interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. And okay, so for you, so I think stress is really pertinent to what you've just said about finding yoga, okay? Because, you know, yoga's a lot, isn't it, about kind of just calming everything down, and for a lot of people, I guess, moving your body from sympathetic into parasympathetic in terms of its autonomic nervous system. So from flight and fight into rest and relax. Okay, so you switch off that stress response, which for so many people they're in all the time in a chronic way. And when your body is in its sympathetic stress response, cortisol levels are raised and adrenaline levels are raised. And what adrenaline and cortisol do is they cause your body to release stored sugar. So when you're stressed, the sugar levels will be higher in your bloodstream. And that's how people who are not over fat and who don't have some sort of underlying cause of inflammation, but just live a very, very chronically stressed life, get type 2 diabetes.
Got it.
Okie dokie. Okay, so let's have a look, see where sugar and starch fit in. Next slide. Okay, so insulin is what controls how your body makes and stores energy. We talked about that already. And eating or drinking sugary or starchy foods is what causes insulin to be raised, because your body pumps it out in response to those foods, because it knows those foods need packing away safely, or the sugar from those foods is packing away safely in cells. The other thing insulin does is it increases appetite, and it stops your body being able to make energy from stored fat if levels of insulin are raised, which is what we've just discussed. So as an aside, perhaps porridge isn't the healthiest breakfast after all. And all of the above, those things we've sort of, talked about here will eventually lead to insulin resistance. However, I put this slide in because I was talking to some colleagues about this the other day, actually. It's one of the reasons I really hate social media. And it's very difficult to post on it, and I worry all the time, because in the same way as this presentation is a generalized overview of this situation, what I try to explain to people all the time is this might not apply to you. And Sarah, I mean, you're a perfect example, you know, everybody's different. So, and I've seen this a lot with the whole kind of low carb keto thing. You know, people, there's a real feeling that, you know, everybody should be doing it. And if you do it, you have to do it all the time. Otherwise, it's no good. Or you'll have to do it this way for the rest of your life. So none of that is true. And it's about perspective. So I'm saying that eating and drinking too much sugar and refined starch over time may lead to insulin resistance. But we're all different genetically as well. So some of us might be really, really predisposed to becoming insulin resistant, and some of us might not. And here's an interesting little aside. For women, when we reach our perimenopausal kind of menopausal time of life, we get insulin resistant. We get more insulin resistant. So if you are a woman who is either perimenopausal or postmenopausal or whatever, and you didn't really struggle with weight, and then you reached a point where you started to see fat going on around your middle, and you were like, what's going on? And that is what's going on. Your body is becoming more insulin resistant. And when you're insulin resistant, that is where the fat gets stored way quicker around your middle. So yeah, processed foods with ingredients are the things we really, really need to be focusing on here, not real foods. And it is much more complex than whether you eat carbs or not. So I just wanted to kind of get that out there. And the ideal way to eat for you depends on your health, your genetics, your life stage. So yeah, there is no one size fits all approach to health, and there is no one quick fix or magic bullet. In other words, not everyone needs to reduce carbs, and it depends on the type of carbs that you eat and drink. Okay, And and who loves my picture of the cocktail on a Friday night? So alcohol is often the elephant in the room. I see this so much. People come to me and actually they're eating pretty well, but they're drinking too much. And drinking too much can just be a glass of wine a night, or it could be half a glass of wine a night. And the other thing, and it's so unfair, but for women around that kind of like 45, 55 years old time of your life, it might really benefit you to stop drinking alcohol completely, or most of the time, because it's the one time of your life when it really isn't going to do you any it's not going to help you at all.
Sorry, can I just ask if there are any better alcoholic drinks for you? Or-
Not really, Sarah, because it's about, yeah, and I understand why you're asking that. So again, that's something which is talked about quite often on the whole, you know, on the internet in terms of low carb and keto. Like, you know, you could drink vodka or you can drink gin because there's very little sugar in it, and it's not just about the sugar, it's about the alcohol. Particularly for women, it's about the effect that the alcohol has on your liver, because your liver is busy you know, sorting out your female sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, everything else. You add alcohol into the mix and it has all sorts of impacts on your body. It's not just about the sugar in alcohol, it's about the alcohol and alcohol.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. So if your metabolic health is poor, okay, and this is really important, so only if your metabolic health is poor, then reducing refined processed carbohydrates is the best way to improve it. And this is where starch comes in. So this is a talk where I could go off at a tangent and like really get stuck into how do you know if your metabolic health is poor, you know, all these other things. I'm not going to do that tonight. So I'm just going to stick to the starch side of things. I did the metabolic health as a kind of like a backdrop to give you kind of perspective to make it relevant. So reducing refined processed carbohydrates is the best way to improve metabolic health if it's poor. So let's talk about starch. So first of all, let's just go back a minute to carbohydrates, because a lot of people I speak to don't actually know what a carbohydrate is. So a carbohydrate is an umbrella term which encompasses sugar, starch, and fiber. Okay, so just in case anyone didn't know that, sugar, starch, and fiber are all carbohydrates. So why might starch be the missing piece of your puzzle? Well, because refined starch becomes sugar so fast when you eat it that it might as well be sugar. And here's why. This is a starch molecule. This here, that's starch, and this is sugar. Okay, it's glucose, same thing. For tonight, I'm calling it sugar. So as human beings, we store our excess sugar as fat, and plants store their excess sugar as starch. And what they do is they cleverly join all those little sugar molecules together with bonds. And so all those sugar molecules are kind of stuck together. And when they're stuck together, they don't taste sweet anymore. So if you're eating starches, they don't taste sweet. So you wouldn't know they were sugar. Sorry, I'm just having a drink. That's my vodka in my glass. So there you go. That's the molecule that's starch. And this is Mr. Amylase. Okay. We find Mr. Amylase in the saliva in our mouths. So amylase is an enzyme which breaks the bond that stuck all those little glucose molecules together to make a starch. So this line here, oh, wrong way, is that. Okay. So amylase comes along and it snips the bonds between them. And then you've got all these lovely little free sugars. And that happens in your mouth. So for refined starches, by the time you've swallowed, you're swallowing sugar. It's that fast. And that is why this is a nonsense, okay? Because everything in this picture, apart from that maybe, is made from flour. And flour is a grain ground to a powder. That is a refined starch. By the time you have ground a grain, regardless of whether it's whole grain or not, it's so broken down already that by the time it's been cooked and made into a product that's made with flour, it's sugar by the time you've swallowed it. And so let's have a quick look at whole grain, because healthy whole grain is something which really winds me up. So healthy whole grains, okay, you can call a food a whole grain if it contains all the parts of the grain. It doesn't matter what form it's in. If before they did stuff to it, it contained all the parts of the grain, it's called a whole grain. So you can buy whole grain spaghetti and a whole grain bread and whole grain crackers, and so there you go. And I've just answered my question to you. My question was, what is flour? Okay, so flour is a grain that's been ground into a powder. Will flour or any product made with or containing flour quickly become sugar as you eat it? Oh, must have lost Shelley. And the question is, the answer to that is yes. So this is a healthy meal recommendation by, I got this from a type 2 diabetic site. So this is what we are still recommending type 2 diabetics eat in this country. And type 2 diabetes is the end stage of poor metabolic health. Okay. So we're recommending that people who have poor metabolic health, what we've just spent the last however long talking about, have a breakfast of cereal made with whole grain, or they could have some whole wheat toast with jam. So that's sugar with sugar, or sugar, or more sugar, ground oats, or a whole grain pancake or waffle, more sugar. And for lunch, then we'll have some more sugar because you're going to eat bread, or more bread, or more bread, or some soup with barley or brown rice. So we're going to look at some infographics which will tell you a bit about that in a minute. It's basically, this is sugar. So yes. Okay, so on to these. So there is an amazing doctor called Dr. David Unwin who has an NHS practice up in the Lake District, and he has been using a low carb approach to treat his patients with type 2 diabetes and those patients who are obese for the last 11 years. And he's been collating his research as he does it, collating the results, but he's also put together these really incredible infographics. So here we have breads, okay, and here these sugar teaspoons, this is not the amount of sugar that's in the bread, this is the amount of sugar that the starch in the bread turns into. Is everyone clear about that? Does that make sense to everybody, or has anyone got any questions? Okay, so we're not looking at the amount of sugar that's been added to a loaf of bread. We're looking at what that loaf of bread, what that piece of bread, okay, so this serving size of 30 grams will become pretty much by the time you swallow it. And really interestingly, a serving size of 30 grams of whole grain barley bread will it end up in your body as 5.5 teaspoons of sugar. And there's 4 grams of sugar in each teaspoon. So that is, I don't know why I do this to myself, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 22 grams of sugar in a slice of bread. And that's before you put anything else on it. That's before you put your nice bit of jam on it, or honey, or I don't know. So yeah. Next one.
Would sourdough be any better?
No.
Oh, damn it.
I was going to ask that.
Nice try, but no. It's a shame he hasn't got sourdough on here because it's got so popular. Who doesn't love sourdough?
Yeah. What about rye bread? Oh no, that's there. Sorry, no, that's still bad as well.
Yeah. But
Okay.
it's the principle, Sarah. So what's
Yeah.
happening is those starch molecules have just broken straight down into sugar because it's
Yeah.
made from a ground grain.
Can I just add that a slice of bread, you know, like the normal Warburtons, whatever, 60 grams. I know from years of dieting, 30 grams is one of those really mini loaves. So one proper slice of bread is double what's on there.
Oh wow, Chris, thank
Oh
you.
my
That's amazing
goodness.
information. Thank you. Okay, wow. So basmati rice. Who asked about rice? Bonnie. Here you go. Here's the rice. So that's in 150-gram serving. That's not a massive serving. That rice is going to break down really fast into the equivalent of 10 grams, 10 teaspoons, not 10 grams, 40 grams of sugar.
But that's white rice though, isn't it?
It is white rice. No, that's a really, really good rebuttal. I can. So if I don't have it on here, I'll find it. So the brown rice is a tiny weeny bit less, but not much.
Yeah, I just know that carbs aren't my friend, but as in, you know, rice, bread, those kind of things, and
Yeah.
I avoid them as much as I can because you get carbs in everything that you eat, don't you, really, fundamentally?
Particularly if particularly, you know, vegetarians, because it's impossible to get your protein on its own. It's always mixed up with carbohydrate. Yeah, absolutely.
I can't believe banana. Sorry.
Banana. I know
can't
about
believe- but
banana.
actually, I always think bananas are good for you because of potassium. There's also other nutrients that are are in there. So it might be high in sugar, but because it's a fruit, it's such a thing as better sugar because it's more natural
No,
and less refined.
no.
Really? So what
Okay,
could I
so
have- oh gosh.
okay, so Sarah, back to perspective now. So do you remember the
Yeah.
perspective slide? So for someone who is not metabolically kind of messed up, so someone who doesn't have insulin resistance, that doesn't matter, you know, a banana every now and again is really not the end of the world. So it's a matter of kind of, remember, going back to that sliding scale of where you are and what you need. So I'm not saying that no one should ever eat a banana again. Occasionally I'll have a banana, but so many people out there who are trying to lose weight. There are people out there who are trying to lose weight, or who already have type 2 diabetes, or have been told they're pre-diabetic, or, you know, those sorts of things, where very highly likely we're looking at some sort of metabolic imbalance, you know, poor metabolic health, and they think it's healthy to have porridge and a banana for breakfast. It's not.
That was me totally every morning. A bowl of sort of granola, maple syrup, nuts, and a banana every single day. And I thought, actually, because I was having the banana in it, then actually that was covering a multitude of sins, and I was being really healthy. It was one of my 5 a day.
And actually I can't remember exactly what it was now, but it's something like 4 or 5 times the amount of potassium in an avocado than there is in a banana.
No way. Wow.
So a lot of this is kind of, you know, it's there's so much words gone, sort of dogma around food and what's healthy and what's not. Misunderstandings, I think, at best.
Misconceptions.
Spaghetti's high. This is really why we sort of, you know, if I recommend that someone sort of reduces these refined carbohydrates in their diets, or minimizes them, you know, minimizes, or it depends. These are the sorts of foods which we focus on you swapping out for something else. But look at the bottom, we've got broccoli, nothing, eggs, nothing. Okay, let's move on. Okay, I like this one. This is a pretty new one he's done. So he's had a look at legumes, because obviously this is really important. There are a lot of people who are vegetarian, who who are also struggling with insulin resistance or some sort of metabolic imbalance. And you know, it's not always the answer to just say to everybody we should be eating meat and fish. You know, that just doesn't work for everybody. So again, white rice, massive. Baked beans, I can't tell you the amount of people who say, is it all right to eat baked beans still? No, it's not. But you know, black-eyed peas, these sorts of things, which who was talking about sort of healthy foods? Sarah, you were talking about how bananas seem healthy. And the same thing very much happens for legumes. So, but you know, not so bad. So these are kind of like real foods. And it's worth remembering that these foods have their kind of proteins or amino acids mixed up with carbohydrates because they're plant foods.
Yeah.
But it's still a consideration depending on where you are in terms of metabolic health. Right, okay. Bonnie, this is your slide. It is on here. So there you go. There's the comparison between white rice and brown rice. So 9.6, interestingly, it's gone down here. But brown rice is 7.3 teaspoons. So the starch in that brown rice is going to become 7.3 teaspoons of sugar. The other thing is it might break down a bit more slowly. Okay, so it might take longer to break down into the sugars because there's more fiber in it.
You don't actually need that much brown rice anyway, though, do you? When you're serving up brown rice, you kind of, well, when I serve up, I put about half the amount of brown rice that I would normally have white rice. So because it's so filling.
Yeah,
isn't
and
it?
again, yeah. And so if you're a group of people who don't have any metabolic health issues, there is no insulin resistance going on in your bodies, there is no reason why you shouldn't have some brown rice or even a little bit of white rice with your food. But it's a good thing to remember that, you know, maybe have more veggies. You know, maybe make the veggies and the protein part of your meal bigger than the sort of pretty empty starches, because the other issue with this is they bring pretty much nothing in terms of nutrients in comparison to protein, animal proteins or vegetables.
And so is the fibre you get from vegetables a lot higher than what you would get in, say, brown rice?
And it's a different type of fibre too. It tends to be more gentle on people's digestive systems. Yeah.
Can I just ask about potatoes? I might have missed potatoes. Have they been and gone, the potatoes?
You can ask about potatoes. We can always Louise has put eat cauliflower rice. Nice one, Louise.
Yeah, good idea. We had sweet potato for tea. I always think sweet potato, is that classed as starchy as much as white potato, or I always think that's more of a better alternative, or is that have I got that wrong?
No, it's not wrong. So sweet potatoes have lots of nutrients to offer, but they are starchy because, you know, any sort of root vegetable or tuber stores its energy. And remember, plants store their energy as starch in them, so they're quite a high source of starch, but they deliver lots of other stuff too in terms of nutrients. And actually, sweet potatoes are not a part of the potato. They're a different family to potatoes. So potatoes are part of the nightshade family, and sweet potatoes are not.
Are they part of the root veg?
No, sweet potatoes grow above ground. I'm just trying to remember the name of the plant. Oh my God. I can't remember, but I know it has lovely flowers that open and close when it's daytime and nighttime. But
I don't know.
Yeah, sweet potatoes, you have to grow them in a warm climate, and they grow above the ground. They're like a vine. They grow on a sort of a creeping vine which is on the ground.
I didn't know that.
Okay, so we're nearly at the end. So my take-home messages are that refined starch effectively equals sugar. Okay, refined starch equals sugar. So if you're getting starch from whole real foods like root vegetables and things like sweet potatoes, it kind of sits in a different category unless you are already, you know, so metabolically sick that you have to make big changes. Okay. And in fact, some refined starches actually become sugar and enter your bloodstream quicker than some sugars. And that is because sugars are very often what we call disaccharides. So they're two different types of sugar molecules joined together, and your body has to separate those in order to be able to kind of use them. And that can take longer, believe it or not, than refined starch being broken down into sugars, separate sugars. So this kind of like really sort of constant bombardment of all of these different types of sugars whooshing into your bloodstream leads to increased hunger and cravings, blood sugar spikes, and big blood sugar spikes and big drops, and ultimately over time insulin resistance, poor metabolic health, and an increase in body fat and difficulty losing it. So the summary is, if fat loss is your goal, you need to reduce your insulin resistance, improve your metabolic health, and watch out for those healthy whole grains. Okay, so hello again. Right, so I'm going to stop the recording